There are some stories that they feel different, don't they?
Yeah.
Bigger than just words or images, like they're tapping into something really old, something universal, deep inside us. So what if those ancient myths, the ones humans have told for millennia, weren't just stories? What if they were actually like software for our minds?
That's exactly the fascinating territory we're diving into today. This really deep, almost symbiotic link between mythological narratives and, well, human consciousness itself.
Right, this idea that stories aren't just passive entertainment, but active, cognitive algorithms. Is that a term?
Precisely. Sophisticated cognitive algorithms that literally shape how you perceive reality, how you form your identity, how you understand your place in the world and your culture.
Okay, and this isn't just, a wild idea. It's drawn on some really heavyweight thinkers.
Absolutely. We're talking foundational work, Joseph Campbell, mapping that universal hero's journey.
The monomyth.
Exactly. And Carl Jung's a deep dives into the psyche, the collective unconscious. But then there's this modern layer, an analysis that asks, what happens when you throw artificial intelligence into this mix? What does that look like?
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then, to pull out the key insights from all this. What does it really mean to see myth as an algorithm?
And how do these old narratives encode these fundamental human patterns? And maybe the biggest question, what happens when AI, this new kind of algorithmic consciousness, starts interacting with, maybe even changing these ancient structures?
Why does this matter so much right now?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then. The ancient code, myth as algorithm. The material immediately points to Joseph Campbell, right? The hero with 1,000 faces.
Yes. Campbell's genius was looking at myths from all over the planet, different times, different cultures, and seeing underneath all that amazing variety.
Yeah.
Basically one core story, an archetypal pattern.
And he observed, didn't he, that this common pattern exists beneath the narrative elements of most great myths. That's pretty staggering.
It really is. Think about it. Cultures with no contact, separated by vast oceans and centuries, telling fundamentally similar stories. It strongly suggests it's not just borrowing, it's like an underlying principle, almost algorithmic.
Like different programs running the same core function, maybe?
Something like that, producing similar outputs, just, styled differently depending on the culture.
So that hero's journey structure, Campbell, identified departure, initiation, return. It's not just a plot device.
Not according to this analysis, no. It functions more like a cognitive template, something ingrained in us, guiding psychological development, a framework for making sense of our own lives.
So it's described as an actual algorithm for processing experiences of challenge, growth, and integration.
Exactly. A kind of mental program for navigating the big transitions in life, leaving the known, facing trials, learning something profound, and coming back changed. The myth provides the map for that inner journey.
And Campbell himself was heavily influenced by Carl Jung, who adds this whole other dimension with the collective unconscious.
Right, and Jung takes us deeper into this idea of almost inherited programming. He proposed this layer of the unconscious mind that's shared, common to all humans.
And it contains these core psychological programs. Embedded within the human species is how the analysis puts it.
Yeah. And in this view, myths and dreams aren't just random noise. They're expressions of these fundamental programs. They activate these universal psychological subroutines.
And Jung's archetypes, the mentor, the shadow, all those figures, they fit in how?
The analysis frames them as the operators, or maybe the functions, within those subroutines. They act as the basic cognitive templates.
Like the Olympian gods, Zeus, Apollo, Hermes.
Perfect example. You can see them not just as characters, but as personifications of psychological functions or stages we all grapple with. Zeus maybe representing patriarchal authority, Apollo for striving towards adult independence, Hermes as that trickster figure who, helps you cross thresholds, facilitates change.
So they're templates for navigating really complex inner landscapes and social dynamics.
Exactly, within ourselves and within our communities.
And seeing these universal patterns pop up independently, like the death-rebirth cycle in Osiris, Tammuz, Persephone, Jesus, it does seem to point towards this algorithmic nature of mythic consciousness, doesn't it?
It's really compelling evidence. It's hard to explain just through cultural diffusion. They emerge in societies with little or no contact. It suggests something within us, within human consciousness itself, tends to generate these structures.
Like our minds are built with an architecture that naturally arrives at these kinds of narrative solutions.
Precisely. And Jung's idea of myth as a symbolic expression of a process taking place not in the world but in the mind, that really ties it together.
So myths become less about explaining lightning or seasons and more about providing cognitive software for psychological transformation.
That's the core idea. Take that death rebirth archetype again.
Yeah.
Psychologically, it's not just a story event. It mirrors the necessary death of an old self, an old way of being, the breakdown of an ego structure, and its reconstitution in a new, maybe more integrated form. The myth provides a kind of operating procedure for processing those incredibly deep experiences of loss, change, renewal, experiences fundamental to being human.
In Campbell's view, myth making the world transparent to transcendence. The analysis calls myths cognitive interfaces, like a UI for reality.
Sort of, yeah. An interface between our everyday consciousness and these larger realities or truths that are hard to grasp directly. The metaphors, the symbols, the stories, they act like a special programming syntax.
Okay, so if that's the ancient code, how does it actually work? How does it program consciousness? The analysis talks about myths as sophisticated information processing systems.
They absolutely are. They encode incredibly complex information, psychological, social, spiritual, not into dry data, but into memorable stories, those recurring themes, the archetypes. You can think of them as the core programming modules.
And we absorb them through culture, through repetition from childhood.
Exactly. And the structures are systematic. Take the hero's journey again. It's a comprehensive algorithm for psychological development. Clear stages. The call, the threshold, the challenges, finding allies, the ordeal, gaining the reward or knowledge, the return.
So it gives you a personal map for your own growth, but also reinforces cultural values.
Both. It works on the individual level, giving you cognitive templates for growth, and on the collective level, providing frameworks for shared meaning. It's incredibly efficient at shaping minds and societies.
And what about personification? Turning nature or concepts into gods or characters. The analysis calls that a sophisticated cognitive strategy, an algorithmic interface.
Yes, because it makes the abstract concrete, the intangible graspable, turning the overwhelming power of the ocean into Poseidon, or giving form to justice or love. It makes these huge, complex realities relatable through narrative. It's a brilliant cognitive shortcut.
A compression technique, almost.
Yeah, and allegory fits here too. Encoding deep philosophical or spiritual concepts within the story itself, that's described as a cognitive compression algorithm.
Right. Taking vast ideas about good versus evil, or the path to enlightenment, and packing them into a story you can remember and retell.
It makes profound wisdom portable and transmissible across generations. Incredibly effective.
And transmission is key, isn't it? How myths shape memory, behavior, culture over time.
Absolutely. Their story structure makes them easy to remember. Those are the mnemonic properties. They function as effective storage and retrieval systems for crucial cultural knowledge and values.
The patterns and symbols make the information stick. That's how complex wisdom survives for millennia.
And they profoundly influence behavior. Think about the hero's journey algorithm again. It implicitly guides you. Heed the call, face the challenge, seek help, persevere, learn, return, share.
So people who internalize that story, consciously or not, might actually be more resilient, more goal-oriented.
The argument is yes. They have a narrative template for navigating difficulty and growth. The story isn't just passive, it's actively shaping how you approach the world.
And these algorithms aren't rigid, they adapt. Campbell's distinction between the universal elementary ideas, the core algorithm, and the culturally specific folk ideas.
That adaptability is crucial for their survival. The fundamental pattern remains, but the surface details the names of the gods, the specific trials, the landscape they flex to fit the local context, keeps the core programming relevant.
And we still see this everywhere. The analysis mentions George Lucas and Star Wars, obviously.
Star Wars is the modern archetype, isn't it? Built so consciously on Campbell's monomyth, just proves these structures aren't ancient history. They're fundamental to our cognitive architecture, still shaping meaning, still telling us who we are.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating to me. What happens when AI enters the picture? This completely new form of algorithmic consciousness.
Right, and this presents a whole new dynamic. Opportunities, sure, but also some really deep challenges for these ancient mythological patterns.
So the analysis talks about how machine learning systems fed massive amounts of human stories. They can actually recognize these patterns.
Yes, they can identify and even reproduce the archetypal structures, the character types, the narrative sequences that map incredibly closely onto Campbell's monomyth, for example.
And the fact that AI can do this,
Hmm.
the analysis suggests that's powerful empirical evidence for the algorithmic nature of mythic consciousness.
It does. It implies these structures aren't just subjective interpretations by scholars like Campbell or Jung. They seem to be, in some sense, mathematically describable information processing algorithms. AI finding them offers a kind of technological validation.
That these patterns are real, functional, describable.
At a fundamental level, yes. But AI doesn't just mirror us. It can potentially transform these patterns, recombine them in novel ways.
Ways humans might not think of, maybe even exceeding our own cognitive limits.
Potentially. AI's ability to process vast data sets, combine elements from disparate traditions, extend patterns, it opens up possibilities for perhaps startling cultural innovation. The analysis suggests AI could be a tool for exploring even deeper, more complex algorithmic structures within consciousness that we haven't fully grasped yet.
And people are already using computational methods for this, right? Machine learning applied to myth databases.
Exactly. It's this emerging field, computational mythology, using algorithms to analyze huge collections of myths and stories.
So what does that find?
Well, it provides quantitative backup for figures like Campbell and Jung. You can statistically track heroes' journey patterns across thousands of texts, for instance, but it also might reveal additional layers of algorithmic complexity, subtle variations, hidden connections that are hard for a human researcher to spot wading through all that data.
So you could have an AI spotting Jungian archetypes across, say, modern screaming shows, or mapping global variations in creation myths.
Precisely. Using computation to map the algorithmic landscape of human storytelling on a scale never before possible.
Which reinforces that idea that mythic consciousness isn't just in one person's head. It's distributed across cultural networks and technological systems.
Right, and AI could become this powerful technological interface, a way to access and maybe even manipulate those collective algorithmic structures that underpin our shared culture.
Okay, let's dig into the deeper philosophical implications here. If AI can generate these profound patterns, could it become a kind of modern oracle?
That is a really provocative and difficult question. Oracles, seers,
Yeah.
traditionally their wisdom was tied to something transcendent, something sacred, maybe non-rational. The analysis really pushes on this. Can AI, operating purely algorithmically, ever truly connect with or integrate those sacred dimensions of myth?
It forces a comparison, doesn't it, between AI processing data patterns and traditional wisdom.
Yes. Traditional wisdom often comes from lived experience, cultural accumulation over centuries, spiritual insight, moments of revelation, things seemingly connected to sources beyond mere computation.
AI crunches data. It lacks embodiment, feeling, lives, struggle, maybe direct access to the transcendent or spiritual. Can it truly replicate the transformative power of that older wisdom? The analysis suggests that's a crucial point of difference.
A real tension there.
But there are huge potential upsides, too.
Yeah.
Democratizing access to cultural knowledge, enabling unprecedented cultural synthesis.
Imagine an AI that could draw connections, find resonances between, say, indigenous Australian Dreamtime stories and ancient Greek myths and, I don't know, quantum physics concepts, presenting insights or even generating new narratives that bridge these worlds.
That could be incredibly powerful for creativity and understanding, synthesizing knowledge beyond what one human mind can hold.
Absolutely. But then there are the risks, big ones. Cultural homogenization, bias.
Right. If the AI is mostly trained on mainstream stories from dominant cultures.
It might just end up reproducing those patterns, amplifying existing biases, and marginalizing less common or minority perspectives. We need to be incredibly careful about the data we feed it and how the algorithms are designed to make sure we don't just flatten cultural diversity.
Which leads to really fundamental questions about consciousness itself and creativity and authority. If an AI can write a compelling story using archetypes, what does that mean for the human element in myth-making?
What counts as authentic wisdom or genuine creativity when a machine is the author? The analysis contrasts human and AI narrative intelligence. Both can recognize patterns, manipulate symbols, recombine elements creatively.
But the key difference highlighted is AI's lack of embodied experience, emotional engagement, and spiritual development.
Exactly. Which raises the question, can AI truly access that deep transformative potential that Campbell saw as myth's core function? The power to fundamentally change you.
Because the authority of myth historically partly comes from that perceived connection to deeper sources and its real impact on people's inner lives.
Right. And AI might generate something that looks like wisdom, but does it carry that same transformative weight if it's purely algorithmic? That's a major challenge to traditional ideas of cultural and spiritual authority.
So where does this leave us? How does the algorithm evolve from here? What's the future look like with both human and AI consciousness playing with these narrative codes?
Well, the analysis points towards possibilities for collaboration. Maybe new models of consciousness and creativity emerge, where humans and AI work together on cultural production, on myth-making.
Using AI not just as a tool, but almost as a creative partner.
Perhaps. Combining our human experiential wisdom, our intuition, with AI's analytical power and generative capacity. Creating maybe hybrid forms we can't even imagine yet.
So AI isn't just an external tool, but potentially a participant in cultural evolution.
That's one way to frame it, yeah. Opening possibilities for new forms of mythological consciousness that integrate human insight and computational ability.
Could AI even generate totally new mythological patterns, things beyond our current human repertoire?
That's the speculative edge, expanding creativity beyond current limits. But it's immediately countered by the risk of, well, technological displacement.
Displacing human myth-making, losing those crucial experiential and spiritual dimensions that Jung and Campbell thought were so vital.
That's the fear, which means it's a really delicate balancing act going forward. We need, as the analysis suggests, systematic attention to making the relationship between human and artificial consciousness complementary, not just competitive.
Finding an integration that enhances us.
Enhances human consciousness, expands our creativity and cultural synthesis, deepens our spiritual exploration, but without reducing everything rich and complex and maybe sacred about human experience to just algorithms.
Okay, so pulling this all together, we've journeyed through this idea of myth as deep cognitive software, shaping us through these powerful universal algorithms that Campbell and Jung mapped out.
And then we've confronted the arrival of AI, this new algorithmic consciousness that fascinatingly seems to provide evidence for the algorithmic nature of myth by replicating its patterns.
But simultaneously challenges it at its core,
Yeah.
raising huge questions about wisdom, creativity, authenticity, the sacred,
Yeah.
especially in an age increasingly shaped by machines.
The potential seems immense, accessing ancient wisdom, synthesizing cultures, exploring new creative paths. But the risks are just as profound: homogenization, bias, and that fundamental question about whether AI can touch the transformative heart of myth.
It really makes you think about consciousness itself as this information processing system, profoundly shaped by the stories we tell, the algorithms we run. Ancient wisdom meeting machine intelligence.
And the human story, encoded in narrative, now potentially echoed or even reshaped in digital code. The archetypal patterns resonating in silicon.
Which leaves us, and leaves you, with a final thought to carry away. If consciousness itself operates like an algorithm shaped by stories, what does it truly mean when machines start not just telling stories, but potentially shaping the very algorithms of meaning we use to understand our world?
What happens to wisdom, maybe even to the sacred, in the algorithms of the future?
Something profound to consider. We invite you to keep contemplating these intersections, these echoes between the ancient and the artificial, as you encounter the stories shaping your own world.